Welcome to Mobycast. This is the second episode that we're re-releasing from back when we told Chris's personal story of starting Viathan, which was a software startup built to create one of the first internet scale databases. And you'll get to see how his work in the early 2000s, late 90s was instrumental to what later became, the databases that we count on today. Anyway, the reason that you're listening to this is not just because it's a fun story, but because, we're asking you to trust us here at Mobycast to tell you what we think is the best way to do distributed systems and cloud native development. And what better way to learn to trust us than to listen to how Chris got started in this whole world. And Chris really is the expert at these things. And I like to poke and prod and make sure that we get the best of his expertise out. So thanks for listening to part 2.
Welcome to Mobycast, a show about the techniques and technologies used by the best cloud-native software teams. Each week, your hosts John Christensen and Chris Hickman pick a software concept and dive deep to figure it out.
Welcome, Chris and Rich, episode number 40 here.
Hey, Rich. Hey, John. What's up, guys?
Great to be doing another Mobycast. So last week, we left ourselves on a bit of a cliffhanger. Chris was about to take the dangerous step of becoming an entrepreneur. And then right before he told us what that was going to be like, we pulled the plug on the Mobycast and said, let's wait a week. So here we are. And, we're talking about, definitely go listen to last week's episode, but we're talking about DynamoDB and AWS and Werner Vogel's talk, his keynote, and how that sent Chris down a bit of a trip down memory lane, and then just how history kind of repeats itself. So I think, the point of this story is really that this is what software is all about, is these cycles and history repeating itself and essentially solving the core problems that technology is meant to solve, or software is meant to solve, but with new tools and new techniques and new, bigger challenges and at bigger scales. So last week we talked about Werner Vogel's keynote, and why Amazon, not AWS, but why Amazon decided to shift away from using a relational database for a lot of the querying and data that they need for their Amazon.com website. And then Chris told the same story, but from 6 years prior to AWS having this, or Amazon having this problem, via Microsoft and MSN. And it kind of ended on a sad note where Microsoft killed Chris' project, his pet project where he was building his own internet database, and kind of from a lack of vision, I would call it. Clearly, Chris was solving a real important problem that eventually did get solved. But before it gets solved, Chris is going to go out on his own and found a company about it. So Chris, let's take it away from there. I think it's March 11th, 1999.
Yeah, it's a little bit before then. I left Microsoft at the end of 98 to do this. When I left Microsoft, we, myself and Marco, we were working with patent lawyers at Microsoft to draft up 4 patents related to this work that we did on how do you build an extensible storage layer for internet style data. So we had, several sit down discussions with some of the legal team there at Microsoft, the patent lawyers, to put that stuff together. But I couldn't wait. I wanted to go solve this problem now that the project had been basically terminated. So I left Microsoft at the end of 98. Those patents would still had to have the I's dotted, the T's crossed. I think there was like one subsequent meeting that Marco stayed at Microsoft for several years after that. And so the patents were officially filed, I think, in March of 99, even though I had left at the end of 98.
What's so sort of funny is that same year I was working on a thesis for my computer science degree where I was trying to see if I could get some kind of neural network into a robot car. I didn't get the neural network in. I did get some computing into the robot car, but it's sort of funny because this year also at reInvent during one of the keynotes, Deep Racer was announced, which guess what? It's a neural network in a robot car. So we were both working on things that eventually AWS would announce in 2018.
Yes.
We're talking about in 2018 reInvent.
Yeah. Yes. The cycle continues.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah. So I left. It was kind of weird because like looking back, like I had no hesitation whatsoever. And I hadn't even been there quite 3 years yet. So I was less than half vested in all my options. This was a peak time for Microsoft stock as well. In the less than 3 years that I'd been there, the stock had split 3 times. It was crazy.
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
Every quarter when we had the earnings call, it just blew it out the door. And it was a Wall Street darling, and the stock, it literally went from, I think my original strike price was something like $10. It ended up being like $10 a share. And by the time I left, it was $100 a share.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So but like I said, I walked away from over half that. It was without hesitation, right? I was kind of
right.
Man, that was either ballsy or stupid. But in retrospect, I have zero regrets. So left Microsoft at the end of '99. Started, I teamed up with a former Microsoft colleague, Steven Anderson. He had left Microsoft. We had been actually office mates for a while there. And he had left Microsoft about 6 months prior to me. He went to go work for a software development company as their CTO and helped them grow their business. And we got to talking, and I told him about, what was on my mind and wanting to go deal with this problem and build solutions for it. And he was excited by that as well. So we decided to, hey, let's go do a company. Let's go make this happen. This is also, 1989, right? This is the height of the first internet bubble. Like, it is just so frothy. So listeners out there may remember things like pets.com, right? And may remember things like Starbucks investing like $400 million in furniture.com, like, or I don't know if maybe it's living.com, right? It was an online furniture website, right? Where it was like, they obviously like things like logistics of like, how do you ship this stuff? And not like end up, eating all your margin with stuff like that. So it was a really interesting frothy time. The net is like literally within 6 weeks of me leaving Microsoft, we were, Steven and myself, we were in the private back room of one of the high-end steakhouses in downtown Seattle. We're in this wood paneled room with this massive wood table. We're all sitting around and having a lunch. There's 4 or 5 venture capitalists along with Steve and myself and another individual. And, one of the VCs is like, yes, well, we would like to invest in you. And so has a term sheet. It's upside down, face down on the table, and slides it over to Steven. And I'm just thinking, it's like, this is so unreal, right? Like, this is like straight out of a movie.
Right.
And, Steven turns it over and it's like, here's our seed round term sheet for $700,000. So, I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to get $700,000. Like, we have no assets, right? It's just basically Steven and myself. It's an idea. It's a pitch. We haven't generated a document yet. We don't even have an executive summary typed out. Like, it is literally just a pitch. And here it is, like, we're going to get our shot, and we have capital like immediately right out of the gate to go start executing on this. So pretty exciting. It was just, boom, we are off to the races, and we were just on a mission at that point. Just hit the ground running. So the whole concept was, how do you build this scalable database layer, and how do you do things like partitioning and sharding and clustering, and how do you make it highly available? How do you make it so that it's a completely scale out architecture?
Well, and at that point, you had kind of already done a lot of work on it for Microsoft. Obviously, you couldn't use that code anymore, but you'd probably already learned some of the things that you wouldn't have, you wouldn't want to do again, right? Like, oh yeah, if I were to write that again, I'd do it a little differently.
Absolutely. I mean, so the work at Microsoft, some of the core concepts, this was building on some of those core concepts, but the actual implementation and really how it was different, right? It was rotated, at least 90 degrees, if you will. The work we were doing at Microsoft was really geared towards, it was a different persistence mechanism. So we were primarily thinking about file-based storage instead of that was the database. The file system was the database. It was dealing with things like XML was the document format back then, and until JSON came along, right? So we actually had XML. So there were differences and there were some different kind of goals, but absolutely the work with the startup company was.
And what was the name of the startup company?
So the name of the startup company was Viathan.
Okay.
And naming things is one of the hardest things in the world to do. And so like when we started our company, it was like, we have to come up with a name for it. And you have to do things like, copyright searches, trademark searches. You have to do things like domain name searches, right? And see what's
the luxury of doing a domain name search in 1999.
Well, I mean, then it was like, it was, there was infinitely more choices. However, it was still difficult.
Right.
Like it felt like all the good ones were taken and it was very hard to come up with something. So it was almost like, it kind of felt like the couple in the hospital that has a baby and it's like 2 days after the birth of the baby and still don't know what to name it. And they're like, well, you need to fill out this paperwork for the birth certificate. So pick a name. And so Steve and I, we were in an elevator, riding the elevator up into our lawyers' offices to draw up the paperwork for incorporation. And I kind of came with this idea. I was like, well, what about Viathan? Because I was the code name for what we were building, we were calling it Leviathan, because Leviathan, name of a monster, very, very big, lurking underneath, the water.
Literally. From Moby Dick, which here we are on Mobycast. Whoa.
Again, it comes full circle. Everything is related, people. Everything.
Right.
Yes. And so I said, let's just chop off the LE, Viathan. We'll make up a word. And Steven's like, I love it. Sounds great. We run it by our lawyer. He's like, I love it. It sounds big. It sounds forceful. It sounds strong. So that's how we named the company. So Viathan was the name, and off we went. So we, again, how do you store this internet data? It's not really relational. How do you deal with things like partitioning, the sharding? How do you cluster it? What are all the components that you need into that to go build that out? And so we spent the next few years doing exactly that. We, lots of lessons learned over the process. We got a lot of things right, and we got a few things, really wrong. And at the end of the day, that's what kind of hurt us. But I think the net there was that this was still early days, and so even though companies like Microsoft at that kind of scale had this problem, the rest of the ecosystem wasn't there, and there wasn't it's still, the internet hadn't grown to the size where there was enough people with that pain, and they needed a solution today. They knew they were going to need it a few years down the road, but not necessarily today.
So I have a couple of clarifying questions, though. You had said at one point you were talking about file system, files on the file system storage and XML. And I just wasn't clear when you said that, whether that was Viathan that was using XML and files on the file system or whether that was Microsoft.
Mm-hmm. So what we were doing at Microsoft was like, let's not have a database, like let the file system be the database. So so the project name at Microsoft, we actually called it IFS, which was short for Internet File
System. Yeah. Oh, file store. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So basically it was backend code on that at the end of the day is using. In a way, you can think of what we were building was really similar to S3.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking
it's
about.
Just super, super similar to S3, if not almost again verbatim. And so that was the work at Microsoft with.
You were building a data lake, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially. Because that's what all this data could be stored in files, and those files were actually XML documents, right?
Right.
So that was the whole gist behind that. With Viathan, we took a different tact, and we said, let's actually. There's some good things about relational databases in that, they are highly performant. They have very, they are built to support ACID. So let's leverage the best and design around the negatives of them. So with Viathan, we actually used relational database as the persistence store instead of a file system, but still sticking with this concept of you don't have like these multi-table relationships. They really are like these bits and blobs of data that are independent. So build in to support the concept of things like sharding, partitioning, clustering, but use a relational database as the actual persistence store.
Just kind of wanting to dig around in that idea a little bit. I'm just imagining that one of the things about doing that is like a database sort of writes everything to a set of files that it keeps open. So when you use a file system, you maybe have to go open and close files, and that takes a little time. It's a little slow. Whereas if you have the file handles already, they're just sitting there ready for you to write or read from the file, then everything gets faster. So is that part of what you were thinking? Like we can make this faster by using like something like a database that just is good at pulling information in and out of files that it already has access to.
And it was multi. There's multiple reasons.
That and you get the ACID transaction stuff for free.
Yeah. So things like locking transactions. And then also just going to market with something like this to say like we're built on top of these industrial strength systems, right? That is a net win, as opposed to saying like we're building something completely from scratch, based upon the file system.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So
interesting that like you kind of built a document database on top of relational databases, so you would get the ACID compliance, and that this year, 2018, Mongo announces ACID compliance.
Yeah, yes. Now, and DynamoDB now supports transactions.
So, yeah, craziness.
Yeah, indeed.
Quick interruption to ask you to please go to mobycast.fm/show-notes and sign up for our show notes. Those give us a chance to send you the show notes once a week. They're detailed outlines that have all the information that we present in the show, which makes your email searchable. Really cool. And we definitely don't use that address to spam you. In fact, we can barely remember even to send out the show notes every week. So thanks for signing up.
It's again, like I said, it's interesting how far we got with Viathan. And so that work, we did get rather far with it. We went through several iterations. That work led to a few patents being issued as well.
Before you talk about those patents, another thing I've never asked you about this is, did you have any kind of significant customers doing any important real work ever? It's okay if you say no. I mean, you could have just been too far ahead of the market.
Or I could just lie, right?
Right.
Yeah, we had IBM, we had NASA, we had Bank of America. No.
Oh shoot! You had me going. I was like, well, that's freaking cool. That's great.
No. So again, this kind of gets into some of the trials and tribulations. And some of the big lessons learned that we had. So I kind of alluded to the fact like the ecosystem wasn't ready for it. And so, at that point in time, like you didn't really have much, and like there wasn't much in the way of dynamic programming languages. I mean, almost everything was compiled, right? It was basically C and Java were your options. And for the most part, you were writing those as like native applications. You were, if it was web-based code, you were doing ISAPI extension. ISAPI extensions, which is basically a plugin model for Microsoft's internet server.
Yep.
But you're writing C code to go into that, and then your C code was using SDKs. Like you weren't this whole like concept of API driven development and RESTful APIs. Like it really wasn't a thing at that time.
Right. You
were just writing code the way that you always had, with just linking to an SDK and calling that API, and it was doing its own marshaling over the network and unmarshaling and whatnot. So in order for someone to adopt this technology that we're building, right, it wasn't just, you couldn't just like plug it in and turn it on and it just works, right? Like they actually had whatever applications that they had that were storing and retrieving data, those applications had to be modified, right? They had to write to our SDK so that it could actually leverage the data layer that we had built. So that was a big source of friction.
I can't imagine there being an entity Java bean for Viathan database.
EJB didn't even exist. Enterprise.
Okay.
The enterprise edition of Java didn't even exist at that point.
Okay.
So this is 2000, 2001.
I don't know. EJBs maybe have been there by then, but maybe you were too far up in the Northwest, too close to Microsoft to hear about it.
Probably. So we did have this issue with like, okay, there's one, like we're asking you to replace your database with us. Right, that's a huge thing. And then two, you have to go and rewrite your application with our new SDKs and APIs, right? Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some work there to be done. We spent a lot of time. I mean, I personally spent a lot of my time on planes, going and visiting folks down in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, working on just that of getting like basically beta customers.
Right,
and pilot. Pilot. And so it was a tough sell. I mean, we went and talked to a bunch of super interesting companies, that were doing. They were at the top of their game. So we went and we did go down and talk to IBM and some of their engineers. I was talking with EMC quite a bit. We went down and talked with LoudCloud, and for people like this is going in the Wayback Machine. LoudCloud was what Mark Andreessen did after he left Netscape. So it was all about data center, basically giving you data center management software, right? And so. We were trying to get in at LoudCloud, to say like, look, this needs to be part of your offering to folks that are trying to run, internet scale businesses, in the software that they need to do it. So the other thing that we ran into is like, we didn't get a lot of time to do this. So from kind of like that point in time of being in the back room of the Metropolitan Grill, steak lunch, term sheet for $700K to, oh no, like this thing's just died. That was about 2.5 years. I mean, we built a lot in the first 18 months, 24 months, but it still wasn't, I mean, we weren't at version 1.0 yet. Like this was very mission critical, very difficult software to build, lots of components to it, lots of things to deal with. And sometimes the last 20%, like this is definitely not the case. Like the last 20% is 80% of the work. Almost, it felt like. So we ran into timing issues and politics and expectations on between folks that we brought in to help round out the management team that weren't comfortable in the space, investors managing their expectations. At the end of the day, we just we ran out of time. And so we weren't able to really bring that to all the technology and the IP that we created. We didn't get the running room to bring it to market. I
think to be fair to you, though, also you did end up getting a little bit more cash at some point, right?
We could sit here and probably spend hours to kind of like going through like that whole history, because it was a wild ride. Right. We did go on to raise more money. At the end of the day, we raised $24 million total. In BC, we grew from 60 to 60 people. Yeah,
I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say that without having to bring it up yourself.
Yeah. So it was like we we hit the ground running. It was like we went from 0 miles an hour to 150 miles an hour in a matter, it felt like, of weeks. And we stayed at that rate, for the whole duration. And so much drama and intrigue, so much great engineering was done and technology was created. Like I said, a couple patents came out of this.
Yeah, let's talk about the patents.
Sure. Yeah. I actually just went and looked at this the other day because I was just kind of interested, especially after hearing Werner describe the trials and tribulations that he had, which led to the creation of DynamoDB. So I went back to the primary patent that resulted from the work that we did at Viathan. The title of the patent is Internet Database System. Thought that was kind of interesting because when Werner was going through his slides, he described DynamoDB as trying to find the notes here for how he actually...
Extensible storage system? No,
it was... I will come back to this.
We'll add it to the note.
Yeah. Yes. Because it was one of those things where it was like, oh my goodness, like it literally is the exact same, terminology. It's just, okay. So
database for internet scale applications.
Yes. So DynamoDB is like, this was the database for internet scale applications. And it's like the title of our patent was Internet Database System. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So similar. It's hard to say the two.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. Like just kind of like looking at the one thing that stuck out to me is that there are 199 other patents that now cite this as prior art, which is that's pretty good for a patent to have that many other patents reference it. That's actually a pretty high number. A lot of patents will have a handful or 20, 30, 40. So to have 199, that's quite a few. So that was really kind of cool and interesting to see that so much follow-on work was kind of citing this as prior art and building on top of it. But even more interesting was to see of those other patents that cited this as prior art, there are, I came up with like 61 of those belong to Amazon. So almost like, what is that? Like that's just about a third of all of the other patents that cite this belong to Amazon. And then if you look at some of those patents, the titles of those Amazon patents, I mean, they are like the components of DynamoDB, right?
Right.
It has to do with partitioning and sharding and request routing, and so it's just super, super interesting. I'm not. I
realized though that I'm confused by that because I guess I don't know the patent system well enough. When you reference something as prior art, it feels like if you're building on top of an existing patent, shouldn't you be paying the patent holder a license fee or at least getting in touch with the patent holder and saying, can I use this?
So if you are actually licensed, if you are using it verbatim, then yeah, you need to license that. But the whole idea behind the patent system is basically, you're sharing your intellectual property so that others may learn from it, extend it, and in return, you get the assurance that anyone else that basically can't steal your idea verbatim, right? But derivative work is something different, right? And so all these other patents that cite this as prior art, like that's derivative work. It has to be different enough so that it's not duplicating, it's not stealing, it's not copying what was done, but it needs to be an extension of this. So just like, there was patents that was done at Microsoft for that Internet File Store project, and there were some similarities to it. The work that was done at Viathan, it's derivative work. It's not copying that, but it's kind of taking some of those principles and now taking it to the next level, right? So it is new. It's new. It's a new invention, right?
Okay, so, got it.
So yeah, so that's what's going on here. So these are and this is all part of the patent process too. When you file a patent, you need to go and do a patent search to see, okay, what are similar patents? And this kind of helps the patent examiners as well. They're going to do it when they examine it to go look into the patent database to see where, what other patents are similar to it in the same kind of categories and whatnot, and make sure that there's not overlap, right? They will, because you will have this as well, right? Like if there is some overlap and the patent examiner has issues or questions with it, then there will be back and forth, right? And you may have to either explain your way out of it or actually change your claims, right? They will definitely be, because at the end of the day, it's the claims of the patent that dictate what it is that you get to keep as yours, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and what can be enforced.
Right. So I think, this little side journey on patents, I think the important thing to take away is kind of what we're going to get into over the next couple of episodes is basically, Chris, you literally did a lot of the groundbreaking work for what would become DynamoDB, and then and that's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of episodes. We're going to really look under the hood at it and see what it's all about. And I think we're going to base most of that material on a talk that you attended at reInvent.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was super excited because at reInvent, they did have a deep dive on the implementation of DynamoDB. So something that Amazon AWS has never really shared before is like, okay, what is the architecture? How does DynamoDB actually work under the covers? And so I was super interested to see, what they did there and how they architected it. And again, it was one of those things like, wow, this is total deja vu. Like, this is exactly what we did at Viathan, or a lot of the exact same problems and some of the exact same solutions. So it was very interesting. So looking forward to diving more into that.
Great. Well, thank you for putting this together, Rich. And thanks for just fantastic stories over the last couple of episodes, Chris. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. See you guys. Bye.
Thanks for listening to that episode. You heard Chris Hickman, John Christensen, that's me, and you also heard Rich Statz, who was our original producer and the person responsible for the idea of Mobycast. We miss him, but we still work with him in other parts of our business. And also special thanks to our producer, Roy England. And we are real people that you can find and really communicate with, and we're available at mobycast.fm and also on Reddit at r/mobycast. See you next week.